Hi, I just got done listening to an hour and 3/4 podcast by some fellows. They call themselves Stone Choir. And I have listened to one of their podcasts before. I didn't get through the whole thing, but it was about repentance. And I thought that one was good. I thought it was interesting, you know. I can't say that I was very pleased by the personality of the podcast itself. I find it rather condescending and snooty. And we speak about the long upper lip. Yes, when we get together and we share our deep knowledge about God and so forth. My grandfather actually was a Lutheran pastor. So I think I got some of that in the blood. But I'm not really up on my Bible and all that stuff. And I, at this point, don't really call or consider myself a Christian. I believe in Jesus and I love Jesus. But I think that this experience of listening to this podcast is a really good example for me of why I can't really consider myself a Christian, which I used to, I suppose, at various times in my life. But now I'm not really anything. I'm not anti either, I try not to be. I do have a lot of issues with organized religion, and anything that humans get together and organize, I tend to, see that as full of flaws, and not want to subscribe too hard, to whatever that is. Fashion movements, religions, sports, just rolling myself a smoke here. See whether I can't relax and talk myself out of this hole that I've just put myself in, listening to this thing. I did it because I said I would. I told a friend I would. And that friend is a man named LP, Lyndon Perry. He has a YouTube and other platforms channel, I Hypocrite. And I wanted to ask him, I called into his call-in show, I wanted to ask him about Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity. Which is something that I wouldn't know how to really... Actually, I don't know much about it, but what I do gather is that the guy rather famously said that evil is something that we can recognize, and therefore we can see how to deal with it. We can prepare for it and this kind of thing. Whereas stupidity, we're really defenseless against stupidity. So stupidity is, a stupid person, stupid people are more of a problem in the world than evil people. I think that's a very interesting thought. It sounds to me like the guy was a bit of a free thinker. Although he was a pastor, he wasn't all about dogma. He was, and you have these two classes within the church, right? You have the exclusive and the inclusive, right? Inclusive, everyone's welcome, do what you like, think what you like, love who you like, blah, 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 which seems rather contradictory to the teachings, to my mind. And then also this exclusivity seems rather contradictory to the spirit of the Christ, by my lights. I'm just a guy. Right? But I took some notes during this podcast, And I thought I would just run through them. So we get into the virgin birth. So some people believe it, some people don't. Some people probably never heard of it. But there's this question, was Jesus actually born of a virgin or not? And my understanding of this is that this is a conclusion that was reached long after the events that are described in the Bible. That this was not a belief held by the earliest practices of the way, the early followers of Christ. They didn't believe that, for example. And this is a belief that was incorporated from extant religious beliefs, wherein you have multiple gods. And so you can have a god who has a wife, and then the wife can give birth to another god, and then that god can become the number one god, which is kind of what they did with Jesus, right? Well, it's a big topic, but somehow Jesus becomes God, right? He never claims to be God. There are arguments that he does because he says things, but to my mind, these things are equivocal, right? So, the name Yahweh, or however you would want to pronounce it, it translates as I am what I am. Now, that's one of the names of God, right? And then when they asked Jesus, do you claim to be God? He said, I am what I am, right? And so some people say, aha, see, he said he's God, right? Or he said, before the creation I was, or whatever. I was there from the very beginning. Aha, see, so that means he's the creator, right? Mental gymnastics. Virgin birth. But I don't know. This is my thing, is I don't know, and I don't know what I don't know, and I'm emphatic on that point. But I can only say, therefore, what I see and what I perceive, what I think about that. And what I see is, or what I just heard was Corey Mahler, whom I have met before on LP's channel. We had a debate. And I gather that he's very intelligent. He does strike me as very intelligent, but during the debate, he also struck me as phenomenally stupid, because the topic of the debate was racism, right? And so to clarify, I brought a dictionary, and in my opening comments, I very clearly stated that I would be taking my definition of the word racism from this dictionary. I showed the dictionary, I read from it, and then in his response, he told me that the problem is that I'm making up my own definitions for words, right? And I knew he would try this, which is why I brought the dictionary, right? Because I understand how to debate, and I thought that this guy would as well, but he didn't. But he's a big brain in some regards, certainly. Got a lot of room for dogma in there, apparently. So Corey says, let's be clear here. Christianity makes truth claims. Christianity is a series of truth claims. If these claims are false, Christianity is false. Well, those are his words, right? And that's why I can't really call myself a Christian, because I heard from another Protestant that in your private life, you can believe what you like, but when it comes to the church, you have to affirm, right? I don't have room for that. I don't have room for two belief systems to jostle, right? And so if I'm expected to believe something that I neither believe nor disbelieve, then I'm sorry, I can't join your movement. Have fun, bye. It goes on and on and on. By halfway through, I noticed that Corey was using Paul to refute Bonhoeffer, right? And this does raise the specter of Paul, because there is a movement. There are some people who call themselves Christians who don't think that Paul is trustworthy. And I'm a person that, now, I don't really call myself a Christian, but I do subscribe to that belief. I don't see that Paul is trustworthy. And this is a huge historical argument that I'm not an authority to go into it, but you can find all kinds of information about that in YouTube, or on the internet, or in books, or wherever. But yeah, I've read books, I've listened to a lot of videos, I've listened to a lot of historians. Well, maybe not a lot of them, right? But I've listened to a few. I've listened to some hours and hours and hours. And so all of this informs my perception. And it's interesting to me that Corey never used Jesus to refute Bonhoeffer. He uses Paul. But Paul is the creator of Christianity. Jesus was not the creator of Christianity. That's a historical fact that I believe can be validated by someone who wants to find out for themselves. You know. And I could be mistaken, of course, but that's my perception. So there appears to be an association made in this podcast between thinking and questioning. For example, questioning dogma. At least from a pastor, right? I suppose maybe if you're just a random guy on the street and you're doing that, maybe that's not subject to the same condemnation. But if they see it coming from this guy who's a great theologian and so forth, that becomes associated with evil and wickedness. So at that point, I thought to myself, well, let's say that these guys know what they claim to know, right? Because they're claiming to know that Bonhoeffer is burning in hell, right? For example. They claim to know that. They state that as factual. So how do they know that? I mean, I'm saying, let's say they really do know it, which I suppose presupposes that it's actually true. But how do they actually know that? Like the virgin birth as well. How do you actually know? I understand that these are tenets of your faith, that you have to believe in it, otherwise you're out. But that doesn't explain to me how you know it's true. That just explains to me why you would want it to be true and why you would emphatically claim that it is. So Stone Choirs state as evil Bonhoeffer's claim that most people find things to think about other than their eternal salvation. Bonhoeffer makes this recognition, and he says, I know it's shocking. I'm paraphrasing here. Right? He says, it may sound shocking, but it's biblical that you or I may consider such matters as do occupy our thoughts, because I don't think all the time about my salvation. Right? And perhaps I should. I do think that it is very good, perhaps the best thing, to turn one's thoughts to God. But that doesn't mean that I'm just walking around all the time pondering my eternal salvation.